having it to give. Taking it. Moving it around.
Hello, my name is Martha Senator, and this is Listen and Be Heard on WPVM 103.7, the voice of Asheville. I'm joined by Tony Robles on the phone. Are you there, Tony?
Martha, I sure am. Good afternoon, Martha.
How are you doing today?
And good afternoon to WPVM listeners.
What's going on, Tony?
I'm doing okay. You know, as you know, we have our daytime jobs, our 9 to 5, and I'm at my 9 to 5 job in my secret hideout, which is next to the garbage dumpster. So that's where I am right now.
Well,
and incognito.
Writers do what they do to keep their behinds covered and keep writing, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm taking ample cover right now next to the dumpster, and getting a lot of inspiration when needed. So, but anyway, it's great to be here. Great to be with you again.
What are you reading?
Well, there is a book called Ugly Mug, and it's by a writer named Darren Todd. Darren Todd is a local writer from Asheville, and his writing kind of, I guess you could say, transcends different genres, horror, speculative, just kind of a nice array of different interesting writing. So we're going to have him as a future guest on the show.
Well, that's good, because that sounds pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. It kind of goes in and out. There's horror, speculative fiction, just multi-genre, and it's very interesting. It's been a good read thus far.
And what else is going on, like, around Hendersonville? I guess that Juneteenth that we were talking about last week, unfortunately, it got canceled at the last minute.
Yes, at the last minute, we got word that it was going to be canceled due to weather. Carl Sandburg House, or Historic Home, is part of the National Park Service, and the higher ups within that organization called the location and said, "Hey, you're going to have to cancel it," because there was some forecast of rain and also hail as well as lightning.
All right. Well, you can't argue with Mother Nature or the Park Service, can you?
Yeah, not even Smokey Bear, But from what I understand, it is in the process of being rescheduled.
That's great. But, in the meantime, one good thing that did come out of that is that Christopher Sims, who traveled to Hendersonville to participate in that, is now going to be contributing to Listen and Be Heard at listenandbeheard.net. So he's trying to move in this direction, and he's going to be documenting some of that from a writer-artist point of view about how to make that move and what's going on. So we thank you for bringing Christopher to us. And we're going to be hearing from you. You did an interview with Christian Lozada.
Oh, yes, Christian Lozada, a wonderful poet who's based out of Long Beach. He actually lives in San Pedro, California. Many people know San Pedro as being the home of Charles Bukowski. There's a rich literary tradition in Southern California, and Christian Lozada is definitely making himself part of that. He has an upcoming book that's going to be released in the next couple of months, and during our discussion, we'll be talking about that.
Okay.
Wonderful discussion with him, Christopher. And again, going back to Christopher D. Sims, it was just wonderful meeting him. He's a wonderful poet. very revolutionary poet, really speaks to people, working people in their struggles. And also his work really tries to break down barriers and for us to come to a commonality in our humanity. And, to show that we have more things in common than we have not in common. And his work is very strong and powerful, and I'm very glad to have met him.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to listening to some of Christian's poetry as well as the interview. And people can check out Christopher's writing at listenandbeheard.net. We're going to go now to an interesting CD from my archives called Mythology, the Matriarchy, and Me, followed by a conversation with Laurie Stone. Thanks for joining us, Tony.
All right, thank you.
Valentines and vulvas. The earth like a woman, in her lushness and her fullness, in her soft and rugged contours, carries in her body, in her spirit, in her sex, in her all-embracing nature, the power and potential of creation, procreation. The association is obvious, the correlation clear. Woman, like the earth, in her beauty, in her patience, in the cycles of her system, in the passion of her changes, in her constant transformation, in her wild and untamed fury, embodies and embraces the same essential energy. Her electric lust is the force which fashions all life, and her love is the fuel which maintains it. Like the earth which sustains us, which supports us and surrounds us, like the earth our beloved mother, who once bore us, who will cradle us again in her bosom when we die, women in early earth-identified societies were honored, cherished sorority sisters of Mother Earth. Their sexuality was imbued with spiritual significance, their power, their own inner vision, and access to ecstasy. Their self-knowledge led them to understand the universal cycles. They were wise in the ways of the world. From the very beginning, women have been identified and exalted as the image, the echo, the counterpoint companion of the goddess, the Great One, who is the earth, who is our mother. Archaeological evidence suggests that from the Ice Age until only about 5,000 years ago, women were the prime technicians of the sacred. They served as shamans, healers, creators of culture. As priestesses, they attended the altars, the rituals, the temples of worship. They tended the fires of the goddess, her generative heat, her sex, the seat of her power. The vulva, representing as it does the passageway through which we enter life, and metaphorically through which we leave it, was probably the first religious symbol of humankind.
Just sharing some thoughts
Survived as a
about women and Valentines and vulvas. We need to be able to speak about these things in the world. That was from a CD called Mythology, the Matriarchy, and Me, and the cut was Valentines and Vulvas. And that's a CD by Donna Haynes, which is probably from the 90s. 1998, yes. And I'm joined on the phone now by Laurie Stone. Are you there, Laurie?
Yes, I am. Hi, Martha.
It's good to have you here today. We're starting a new Laurie Stone spot on Listen and Be Heard.
We're inaugurating our session because we had such a good time last time. We decided this can't be all there is. We should keep talking.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's good to keep, just keep our thoughts about women and women in literature, just keep them going, keep talking about them, and not like silencing ourselves. I was kind of when you were talking about Vita in your Substack, one of the things you mentioned was the difficulty that other women had in supporting women writers at that time when you went to that conference.
Well, it was 10 years ago, but the thing that struck me that was so weird is that that 10 years ago women were afraid that they would lose status by showing an interest in other women, and now it's way more. It was like the beginning of at least me hearing about that. And then, my sort of thought was, what the fuck? Sorry.
Oh, you can't say that on the air,
yes,
please.
Yes, I was
Please, watch your language.
That, right. Okay. It was like, how could this happen? How could this have happened? And then I think, I was there with someone who was, had been in the women's movement, and she just said, well, they don't have a movement now. There's nobody to help them, navigate power. And so, it sort of dovetails into something that just happened for me, which is that I'd just been on a live Zoom conversation with Hamish McKenzie, who's one of the co-founders of Substack. And I started a Substack publication 10 months ago. Now, that's a big shot gatekeeper, theoretically, the guy who co-founded it and who interacts with, it's a huge publishing entity. They have millions of subscribers, and I don't know how many people have Substacks, but probably, something with a zillion after it. And they're very heavy hitters, included in the pack of whomever is, started a Substack publication, like, Margaret Atwood and Patti Smith and Greil Marcus. There's just so many, important writers and thinkers and public figures who also write, included in this world. And it wasn't hard for me to gain his attention, which of course is a great boon for me gathering subscribers. It's a subscriber-based situation. But let's compare. And so what happened is that I don't know, he must have written something that I could respond to rather directly in a social media framework, not individual Substacks. He's got this new thing called Notes, which is a kind of a feed. And I must have reacted to it, and then he said, "Oh, I'll take a look," and he must have started reading me, and then he subscribed, and then he noticed what I was doing in their new kind of social media thing. All to say that within a few weeks of beginning to interact with him, he invited me to a private conversation and then a public conversation, which we just had. Now compare that to the gatekeeping in publishing at the moment. It's always been there. So, I have a very good agent, and I have lots of people in the publishing world who probably know me. But it's so much harder to get anyone to respond to anything in those frameworks. And it truly is. And unless maybe you're super famous.
Why is that?
Because of gatekeeping. Because it's a different framework of how power works and who gets to decide. Just as you were saying about the Vita count, not only are there fewer women, writing about other women or their books being, reviewed at all. Now, in some ways it looks like publishing has changed. We certainly have more women voices in the public conversation of all sorts.
I was just thinking about that movie, The Wife, when you were talking about this.
Right? And yeah, well,
she kind of surreptitiously wins that Nobel Prize through her husband. Yes. So, Meg wrote that book, Meg Wolitzer, and she's a friend of mine. I loved that book. I thought it was fabulous. So how long ago was that set? Maybe 50
Meg's
years
book?
ago? Yes.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Was it sort of like was the prize would have been in the 70s for that guy, maybe? So that wifey person would have been 50 in the 70s or something like that. It was a different. It was like her mother's generation. Really, her mother is a very well-known writer as well. Not her actual mother. I mean, her actual mother is Hilma Wolitzer.
I think the gatekeepers might, one argument they might make is, we look for quality, and maybe that's something like with bullshit. Substack. Yeah. You can't talk like that, Lori. I'm going to have to take you off the air. Sorry. I'm going to have to stop. So
what?
If we can't do that, or we might lose our license. Okay, so it's not worth it to lose our license, right?
No. I'll be careful.
Okay, it's not me gatekeeping here.
I know.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
But what I was going to say about Substack is that somebody might make the argument that it's based on popularity as opposed to quality. How would you answer that?
I don't think so. I think each Substack is its own thing. There are great. Mary Gateskill has it. So everybody's. You're creating your own publication. You're attracting your own readers, and you're getting paid by subscribers. The question that Hamish asked me is, how do you refrain from trying to gather subscribers? Let's say, attract them in some way by, some particular placating. I don't even know what it would be, but I said it wouldn't work for me. My readers are only interested in literary writing. They're not interested in a dumbed down version of that. So I absolutely don't believe that's true. And in book publishing and all forms of book publishing, where there are a lot of gatekeepers, a lot of very bad writing is published all the time. So that can't be the thing.
I think that's true.
I just thought it was really interesting that this man and I could make such a quick connection that will probably turn into something that will have a benefit for me on a large scale. Not necessarily that I'll have a zillion more subscribers or that they'll pay for this Substack, but that there was a kind of inclusiveness and feeling of teamness in this enterprise that I really appreciated. I felt, it was just a moment. It was just recent, it just happened before you called. I just noticed that it was that. And the other thing is that on an individual Substack or wherever one is publishing independently of, a large, publishing house, all kinds of diverse subject matter can be something that you put into the world in the form you want to put it into, and there isn't any negotiating. There's nobody doing certainly no one's doing what do they do now? They do these readings, sensitivity readings. I don't know if it's still a thing, but if it's a thing, I would never allow a piece of my writing to go through a sort of purity testing of that sort. So, there's a huge amount of freedom. And therefore, I can write about whatever I want to write about it in any style I want, in any voice I want. So to me, that's a benefit.
Do you feel like this is something that women in particular might want to consider as an answer to, maybe feeling like they're behind that gate?
Yeah, why not? And you can get paid. I mean, the other thing is not writing for free. And, I have to say that I say this all the time, but I think if you are in a situation where you are being asked to pay a publication to read your work, that is a very bad idea. Do not ever pay anyone to read your work. That is not how publishing is supposed to work. They are supposed to read your work and pay you for your product and your piece, whatever you want to call it, your contribution. And this is rife. Not only are writers not paid, but they're being asked to pay to be read, and it's such a demeaning kind of situation. And women, I think, are more susceptible to that. It goes back to that Rob Spillman thing about Tin House that you were taken by, that as an editor, he noticed that women writers who he actually admired and encouraged to submit again, because he didn't take their first story, they never submitted again. And the guys would keep sending and sending and sending. Right. He couldn't even get rid of them. He would, maybe there was some tiny note of encouragement in a rejection letter, and they were relentless. So that really touched you. You and I had a private conversation about that.
Yes.
And I want to know more about what you think of that.
Well, I went home determined to start submitting things more. And I also thought about it a little deeper. I said it's not so much about the rejection as thinking that I'm not for real, that I'm not good enough somehow.
Yeah, well, that's how rejection works on people. But it works differently. I think it does work differently on the psychology of a lot of male humans. Let's just say that. I don't think any of these things are, biological, or they're not even that necessarily social, because men are very different from each other.
But they're real, whatever they are, right?
Well, they have more capacity, at least, to send their stories to Tin House. At least we know that. But Tin House is not, is not in a vacuum. What Rob was observing was a phenomena that you were an example of. Now, you might think, well, what's the relationship between rejection and a sense that the rejection is right? The rejection knows what's true about me. I don't know what's true about me, the rejection letter. But also the acceptance letter, giving it that much credit at the same, those things too. Oh, I've been accepted. Now I know I'm a real writer.
Right.
One has to find that place in themselves. And maybe the adjective isn't even real writer. It's how much am I willing to work, regardless of what happens to it in the world, to make it as good as it can be. I do think then work goes into the world, but what I also think is that things are changing and have changed radically in publishing, as a business and as a model of publication. And so these new formats and these frameworks like Substack coming in to offer people the capacity to publish. You could say, well, it's all bad stuff, self-publishing, but it isn't. It's not true. I mean, self-publishing a book seems weird to me. I would never do it. But this is...
That doesn't make it bad.
It wouldn't make it bad. I just think it's a kind of a predator's, environment. It preys on people. It's the same thing as a lot of these low residency MFA programs. They prey on people's fantasies. If you're going to write, you're going to write. Nothing's going to stop you. Honestly, it's just not. But we don't just want to write. We also want our stuff in the world, and we want to have a conversation.
We
want to enter our thoughts.
But so we need to be smart about how we present ourselves, and maybe not put ourselves out there like sheep.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think any way a woman can get her work into the world, it helps her. I don't even know what that even means anyway. I'm only saying that I want to encourage you to not feel that there was that much meaning in the rejection letter.
Well,
and
thank you for that.
There also won't be that much meaning in the
acceptance
letter.
It's all about to keep writing, right? Well, that's a good positive note to end on, and maybe we can pick this up next week. And I want to thank you for joining me today, Laurie.
Such a pleasure, and I'll try to do better next time with my mistakes.
Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Coming up is a conversation with Eric Nelson, author of Horse, Not Zebra. But first, we're going to listen to a little poetry.
Since we were just talking about Bukowski, I love this poem because it's angry. The Bukowskis went transcendental. I literally went into his room, where his office over here in San Pedro, and his wife hasn't changed anything. It's just covered in dust. You still see with the Bukowski, you still see cigarette butts that are crumpled in there. Yeah. Hank would meditate in the corner next to the window overlooking his overgrown garden, protecting his privacy and his pool. The chair looks like something you'd pick up in a wrong turn alley you thought was a shortcut and immediately regret. The thick upholstered chair sits low and invites folded legs. Linda is proud of the memory. I could see her face shine like a parent whose kid can act without fingers. She invites the spiritual in, she says, in all its forms. In fact, her spiritual mother is coming today at 2 p.m., but Linda conflates the serenity of spirit with the peace that comes after minoritized hands make desperate and necessary swipes with the rag to clean your for $40 an hour once a week. Labor like that allows you to slouch towards nirvana because you paid someone else to crawl on their knees.
Hello. It is good that you have come to Crow Land, Elk River's edge. There I'm standing, looking for a feeling in the wind. Come down river looking around, feeling gotta roam. So I come down river, looking around, reach into the sound of the water. Somewhere between the reflection and the stars is the feeling of life and love, where you can hear the stars in the wind. Feeling twinkling and fluttering in cottonwood leaves. From yesterday, days gone by, and I have tomorrow. From yesterday that I borrow.
That was the first cut from the United States of Poetry by Henry Reelbird called Driftwood Feelin'. And United States of Poetry was produced by Bob Holman and Joshua Bloom, and it was put out by Mouth Almighty Records in, I don't know, back in the 90s. That's where most of these CDs were doing kind of an archived spoken word special today. And before that was a poem that Christian Lozada shared with Tony Robles, and we're going to hear that interview a little later on. But right now I am joined in the studio by Eric Nelson, who taught writing and literature courses for 26 years at Georgia Southern University, where he received the Ruffin Cup in 2009 for sustained excellence in teaching, publishing, and service. He retired... I lost my place. He retired Professor Emeritus in 2015 and moved to Asheville, North Carolina, where he teaches part-time in the Great Smokies Writing Program at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. His 6 previous poetry collections include Terrestrials, chosen by Maxine Kumin for the J. Kennedy Award, The Interpretation of Waking Life, winner of the University of Arkansas Poetry Award, and Some Wonder, which won the 2015 Javal Press Poetry Award. And we're here today to talk about Horse Not Zebra. Welcome to WPVM, Eric.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Oh, let me turn on your mic and it'll be even nicer.
Yes, I'll say that again. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Very glad to have you. Horse Not Zebra. It's a beautiful collection of poetry.
Thank
you. I've really been enjoying reading through it. I wanted to talk about the title a little bit. Horse Not Zebra, what that means. I think maybe if we were in another part of the world, you might have said zebra, not horse. Am I right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of that. But yeah, horse is well, let me back up and just say it's an expression maybe a lot of listeners already are aware of it. I heard it for the first time years and years ago, and I just loved it as an expression that's used when doctors are being trained and to recognize medical symptoms. And the doctors are told, when you hear hoofbeats, think horse, not zebra, meaning think of the more common thing and not the more exotic thing. So I like that expression, and I think that applies to my own poetry, that I tend to gravitate towards writing about common, everyday, ordinary experiences, and not so much about the exotic ones. Uh-huh. So that's where the expression came from, but it's very much an expression of, I guess, Western culture, because I guess in Africa zebra would be the more common thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But so I think there is a great sense of place in the poetry. Like, this isn't poetry from the Serengeti or something. This is poetry that's very placed in a location. So what is that location, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it is very located. It's the first book I've published since I moved to Asheville in 2015. So all of the poems were written here. So there's a lot of mountains. There's a lot of creeks and rivers. There's a lot of bears. There's, I think, 7 poems about bears. So all of the things that are around me are sort of incorporated into the poems.
Now, when people talk about the ordinary and what's around them, a lot of times they might be talking about getting into a car, going to a job, things based in a, just kind of business as usual kind of world. That's not the ordinary that you're getting at in this book somehow. It seems much more based in nature, in the seasons, in your physical surrounding. Yeah,
that's true. As I said, there's a number of poems about bears, which are not common anywhere except around Asheville.
Have you had encounters with them?
Yes, I had one this morning.
You did?
Yes.
Please tell me.
I was walking my dog. I live near the UNCA campus, and I walk my dog up on the campus quite a bit. And I first came to the small quad on the campus, and I saw a number of 4 trees that had branches broken, large branches, and it was pretty clear to me that a bear had been climbing in those trees and broken the branches. When we kept walking, and it wasn't too much longer that I sort of looked up, and there was a bear looking at me in the parking lot behind some of the dormitories there. And we looked at each other for a few seconds, and then the bear turned around and walked away, and then I realized it was walking towards a cub that was standing behind near a tree. And so the mama bear and the cub just went down into some woods that were nearby. So that was it. But so most people would not say that's a common kind of occurrence.
Well, but on the other hand, I think you must be already observant to have realized that those broken branches were actually from a bear. And I think that's some of the sense I get from your poetry. It's almost like, every morning I walk my dog and I go around the perimeter of my property, and it seems like the same walk every time, but I see new things and I observe a lot of things. And that's kind of the feeling I get from this collection of poems.
Yeah. I love what you just said about walking the same place every day, and it's the same thing, but it's actually different. That you never step in the same river twice. And besides walking on the UNCA campus, there's some woods that are owned by UNCA near my house, and we walk through those woods. And, I try to notice something different every day so that, I'm sort of constantly aware that, this natural world is changing all of the time. And I think it's important if you want to be a writer to be attentive. So I try to make myself attentive to the world around me, and particularly the natural world.
Why particularly the natural world?
Well, it's such a rejuvenating entity, a place to be. It gives so much to us to observe the world around us. And I always say that paying attention to nature makes me more patient, because when you're talking about a tree growing fast, you're talking about years and years is fast. So when I start to think about fast and slow, I try to think in larger terms than my immediate
than
experience.
Your own experiences, even as a human, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you wrote several poems about bears, and there was one in particular. We're doing a lot of talk about your poetry. I thought maybe we could take a little break from that and let our listeners hear a little bit of it and get an idea what I'm talking about. I had one in particular that I really loved, which was about black bears. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. It's called About Black Bears. First thing to know is that they're shy. Wanting nothing to do with us has served them well, flourishing far beyond the aggressive grizzly and polar. If you wander too near, they hope to frighten you with a huff and a bluff charge and loud smacking of lips. That surge of fear you feel, don't dismiss it, no matter how often bears have fled from you. They will kill you easily if they choose. You won't know it's not a bluff until it's not. You won't outrun it. They lope at 30 miles per hour. You won't be saved by water. They like water and swim like whales. If you suspect a bear is near, look up as well as around. It may be perched on a limb like the king of crows, silent but for the whispery hiss of claws scoring bark. You can't run, neither can you hide. Their sense of smell is 7 times sharper than a bloodhound's. Do not play dead. Your best chance with a black bear is to fight. They're smart. They don't like to fight. Among their mysterious ways, they don't claim territory. They share their range with their kind. The size of a small car, they move as silently as cats. They turn invisible at will, shadows of themselves on a sunlit street. They thrive among us, wandering our streets like the holy poor in search of sustenance and peace. Science can't explain how they developed the good sense to den through winter, shutting down all functions but birth. No wonder they are gods in many cultures, bestowers of courage and strength, creators of the universe, from which, in their wisdom, they withdrew and turned into the stars we connect. When they die, they live on at the center of galaxies. Black holes, we call them, pulling us relentlessly toward them.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
What is it about black bears? Why do you have 7 poems about bears in this book?
Well, it's just such an astounding and wondrous thing to me that, black bears we live with black bears, you have these urban bears that are all around us. And to see this very large, very wild creature, 25 feet away from you, that's really magical. That's really something very, very special. And I think that's why I end up writing a lot about it, and I just keep trying to catch that feeling of awe and wonder that seeing a bear gives to you. For me, seeing a bear in a zoo or the Western North Carolina Center is just not the same anymore. It's like, they look like captive bears. But the bears you see around town, they're still wild. And there's just something marvelous about seeing that. I think the fact that they can kill you, too, is something...
You have to respect that, don't you?
Yeah, you have to give it a lot of respect. Yeah.
So I think you have really focused on poetry with your writing. Mm-hmm. Why have you chosen that way to express yourself? And what is your process? Do you go through months to write one poem, or do you have several going at the same time? How do you approach actually writing a poem?
Well, I try to write every day. I don't actually write every day, but I try, and I write most days. And I often do have more than one poem going at a time. I just keep a notebook.
Why is it important to write every day?
Well, for me, it's like playing tennis every day or doing anything every day. It's how you hone your skills, and it becomes habitual, and you have to do it. And for me, writing every day sort of brings with it a sense of purpose and calm. It's a kind of spiritual practice in a way for me. I mean, though I'm not a particularly spiritual person, I feel like that's what it does. If I go a period of time without writing, I really start to feel kind of restless and anxious. So writing.
Okay. So you do it every day. It's kind of like a muscle, I guess, so keeping that muscle in shape.
Yeah, I think so.
And sometimes you've got several going. So is it like a feeling, or do you start with a structure, or do you start with an idea?
I rarely start with a structure. If a poem does end up with some sort of structure, that usually comes later in the process. Most of my poems start out as just kind of blobs, paragraphs on the page. Really, they look more like prose than like poetry. And then, if it feels like to me that something's there, that a poem is in there somewhere, then I start carving away and trying to find, what's all this language saying or trying to say. And
so it's like honing it down in a way?
Yeah, exactly.
And so how do you know when it's finished?
Oh, that's such a good question and such a hard one to answer. But I watched an interview with a poet named Mary Ruefle. I don't know if you know her. She's a wonderful poet.
I don't.
And the interviewer asked that exact question: how do you know when a poet, when one of your poems is done? And she said, "I know it's done when it stops bothering me."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I thought that's it exactly.
But so what is it about poetry? I mean, like some people sit down and want to write a long story to get out what they need to express.
Yeah.
So what is it about poetry that you particularly are so drawn to?
I think for me, there's something about the distillation of it. I used to tell my students it's like something that's been freeze-dried. It's like it's been reduced to its essential elements. It's the experience, and it's been reduced to its essential elements in language. And then as you read it, it starts to grow and expand, in your own mind and through your own experience. So, for me, I really like that compression and the tension of trying to just keep making it more intense.
Okay, speaking of tension, I think, this poem, The Day She Left, I would say there's a lot of tension in that poem.
Yes.
And there was something about it that just really kind of hit me in the gut. Can you talk about it a little?
Yeah, sure. It's a poem, about a relationship that's falling apart or has fallen apart, and this is one particular experience of the male part of the relationship that I think kind of illustrates possibly part of what the problem was in the relationship. And
possibly, but there's that tension in there, like, okay, possibly this is what this is.
Yeah. The poem sort of got it started from that experience that I had myself, which was getting out of a air-conditioned car in August and having my glasses immediately just fog up.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And, I couldn't see a thing, but I thought, I'm going to try to make it to the house. And I did. And then the poem itself sort of arose later, not at that time, but later. But I've never forgot that experience of trying to find my way to my home, without being able to see. And it felt like kind of a metaphor for someone trying to get back to home, to the way things used to be, but is still blind, to.
You're walking through a fog.
Yeah, walking through a fog, exactly. And the character in this poem, does that. And he, as he's walking to the house, he goes by different things that partially define the relationship.
Right.
And then he makes it to the house, but the house is empty. There's nobody there now. But he wants there to be someone, and partly because he wants to kind of brag and just like, look what I did. Although it's kind of a meaningless thing, but and at the end of the poem, he still has the clouds in front of his eyes and still isn't really seeing, what the problem was.
So maybe the reader actually sees it better than the...
Yeah.
Do you have protagonists in poetry?
Yeah, I think so.
I wanted to say protagonist, but maybe you could share it with us.
It's a kind of narrative poem, so yeah. The Day She Left. The instant he steps from the car's cool interior into the August heat, his glasses fog over. He walks to the house trusting memory and baby steps. Hands scanning the air like antennae, he avoids the ugly metal pig she insisted was adorable, misses the concrete bench that came with the house, steps over the bulging root of the maple tree and the broken paver he meant to replace. He gropes his way up the 3 porch steps to the door, feels the key into the lock, and enters the house, smiling and turning his head as if waiting for someone to come and hear what he had done. The gray clouds still floating before his eyes. Yeah, so...
Moment of silence after that.
Yeah. I think we sort of talked about it before I read it, so there's not too much left to say.
Well, I don't think it needs anything else but the poem itself, which is how I really feel about the poetry in this volume. The overarching feeling I got from it is a union with nature, both observing and being a part of nature. And I wonder, sometimes there's a bit of a feeling like this is disappearing from us, that we're observing something that's ending. And I don't want to believe that. I wonder if you feel that sometimes when you're writing about, when we address climate change and the environment and all these things, if you feel a sense of that when you're writing about nature, or if you feel like that that urgency is in this collection.
Yeah, I really do, and it scares me, to think that we're in the process of kind of willfully destroying ourselves as we destroy nature, and it's terrifying. And so I guess part of the reason I write about nature in particular is to try to retain that, to retain the wonder of it and the beauty of it, without overly romanticizing it. But there's one poem in here about who's going to die first, nature or us?
I think I know the answer to that question. And it's us who need to align ourselves if we want to survive, right?
Yeah.
Nature, I think, will go on.
Nature, yeah.
Very well without us. Maybe even better.
Yeah, better, I would say.
And yet we're part of nature. Right. And I think that's, sometimes I think about, and this is why I love these poems so much, like about the bear and the different animals. I tend to think about the beaver a lot. And what I like about the beaver is that I feel like we have a lot in common with the beaver. We change the landscape like the beaver does.
Yeah.
We you can see the Great Wall from the moon, and the beavers do something very similar. They change the landscape. And so I think, like, we do have a purpose. We are part of nature, and we just have to decide, are we going to be doing positive things or negative things with our powers? Yeah. And maybe writers have that responsibility to, like we all do, but so how do writers maybe convey some type of message to people to appreciate what nature is and how we can be a part of it, as opposed to, thinking that it's going to destroy us?
Yeah. Nicole Brown is a local Asheville poet, a great poet, and she's in the process of editing an anthology of poems about nature. But in her description of what she's kind of looking for, she says something about, we write about nature, but, I wonder if we can write for nature. And I just thought that was a really insightful way of thinking about it, instead of seeing, as this kind of, we're here and nature's over there.
To actually speak for...
Yeah, to speak
for the bear. And
and not try to see the bear as a representation of the human, but to see the bear as the bear, and respect it in that way. So.
It's actually that we can learn from. One thing that Robin Wall Kimmerer pointed out in braiding sweetgrass is, and I guess other people have brought it up as well, but the animals were here before us. And Native Americans have always said, that they teach us, that we learned how to survive from the animals. Yeah. And I really get a sense of that in this book, that there's a respect for, the wisdom and nature of other beings.
Yeah. Well, thanks. That's a great thing to say. I've never articulated that to myself about what the poems were doing, but I think that sounds right. And And it sounds like a compliment as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
so
it was. But I picked the poems so far. Maybe perhaps you would like to pick one out that you would particularly like to share with our listeners in Asheville and around the country. You are tuned to WPVM 103.7 FM in Asheville, North Carolina. The show is Listen and Be Heard. My name is Martha Senator, and I'm speaking with Eric Nelson, author of Horse Not Zebra. What would you like to share with us?
I'm going to read a poem called Almost Enough, and it's kind of segues into what we were just talking about our relationship to nature.
Thank you.
And climate change, and what, if anything, we can do about it. Our country is so divided right now that it seems like every time something positive might happen in terms of nature and climate change, that there's just not quite enough votes or energy or people or whatever it takes to get that thing done. And so that it just seems like we're not getting there, but we almost are. We could, with a little more effort. So it's called Almost Enough. Like that rainy night after poker, when Jim backed his car off the driveway into the ditch, and the five of us pushed first from the back, then from the front, then side to side, each time thinking the wheels were about to spin free. When we gave up, the car was stuck deeper in the muck, and our shoes were caked. Or when the stone bench caved in after the hurricane washed out the ground beneath it. There were enough of us to right the legs, but when we lifted the granite slab to reseat it, someone's grip slipped, and it sank into the ground like a grave marker. There were almost, but not quite enough of us writing letters and calling for swing sets instead of asphalt, parks before parking lots, the woods rather than condos called the woods. Almost enough voted against coal ash pits and pig waste ponds so hurricanes of the new climate won't sleep ash and waste river by river to the ocean, fish rising up dead as they go. There's almost enough of us to wipe oil from 1,000 gulls before they suffocate, almost enough to drag dolphins back into water deep enough for them to dive away from us. Almost enough of us to pull the arrows from the eagle's grasp, pass the dimmed lamp to the smallest hands. Almost enough to save, a bucket at a time, the house from burning down. So at the end of that poem, the eagle's grasp is the symbol of the United States, with the eagle holding arrows in one talon and I think laurel leaves in the other. But it seems like we spend way too much time focusing on the arrows and not enough time on the laurel.
Almost enough.
Yeah.
That's a very poignant phrase. I mean,
yeah,
it's like tragedy, really. Almost enough.
Yeah.
Is not enough, is it?
It's not enough. Yeah, we got to get a little farther along, and it's just not looking too good.
Yes, we do. I want to thank you very much for joining me today, Eric.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
The name of the book is Horse Not Zebra by Eric Nelson. People can find out more about you at ericnelsonpoet.com. Do you have any readings or anything coming up or any message for our audience?
I don't have any readings scheduled in the near future. I want to put in a quick plug for a conference that's going on next week at UNCA that's sponsored by an organization called
UNCA is University
North Carolina at Asheville.
Uh-huh.
And the organization is called Yetzirah, and it's an organization meant to promote and help Jewish poets particularly. And so they're going to have a conference next week. Some really major American poets who are Jewish are going to be there.
And how can people find out more about that?
If you just do a search for the name of the organization, Yetzirah.
How do you spell that?
Yetzirah. Yetzirah.
A Yetzirah conference.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and something will pop up. It's a 2 or 3 day conference with lots of readings, lots of discussions. Alicia Ostreicher, who's a particular favorite poet of mine and who's a very well-known poet, is the keynote speaker. Some of the events are free. Others, you have to be a participant in the conference, but there's plenty of free ones. So, yeah, check it out. I think it's going to be a great conference.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for joining me today, Eric Nelson at ericnelsonpoet.com. I encourage our listeners to find Horse Not Zebra. And I want to thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We're going to go now to an interview that Tony Robles did with Christian Lozada. You're listening to Listen and Be Heard. My name is Martha Senator, and this is WPVM FM, the voice of Asheville.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you, Martha, and welcome to Listen and Be Heard Radio. We have another fine author interview. If you want to check out some of our older interviews, please go to listenandbeheard.net. We've interviewed Glennis Redmond, who's the current poet laureate of Greenville, South Carolina, among other great writers. So please, again, www.listenandbeheard.net. Today we have a powerful poet who has a forthcoming book. Christian Hanz Lozada is the son of an immigrant Filipino and a descendant of the Southern Confederacy. He knows the shape of hope and exclusion. He authored the poetry collection, He's a Color Until He's Not, and it's forthcoming from Moontide Press. He co-authored Leave with More Than You Came With from Arroyo Seco Press, and his poems have appeared in Hawaii Pacific Review, which was nominated for a Pushcart Prize, Sin Caesar, formerly Dryland, Rigorous, among others. Christian has featured at the Autry Museum and Beyond Baroque. He lives in San Pedro, California, and uses his MFA to teach his neighbors and their kids at Los Angeles Harbor College. Christian, welcome to Listen and Be Heard. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Now, you're speaking to us from, it's San Pedro, correct?
San Pedro, it's the south of LA.
Well, we want to make the distinction because it's not San Pedro, it's not San Pedro, but San Pedro. Can you talk a little bit about that? Tell us about that particular pronunciation.
It's just what the locals do. This is a port town, so it's very rough and ready. We just had Fleet Week over here where the Navy came out for up until maybe just before the pandemic. The Navy used to warn their people coming on shore not to hang out in San Pedro because it's a little rough. It's a little violent. That's not what we are anymore. We used to be one of the most dangerous places in Los Angeles.
That was
decades ago. So yeah, we're very, very much we won't pronounce things correctly.
Sure.
We have a Cabrillo Beach. It should be Cabrillo, but we call it Cabrillo. It should be San Pedro, but yeah, we call it San Pedro.
Well, I know in San Francisco, nobody calls it Arguello Boulevard. It's Arguello.
Yeah.
And no, I totally understand. You describe yourself as the son of both a Filipino immigrant and a son of a daughter of the American Revolution or the Confederacy. Your book has a lot to do with identity. Talk to us about how these two parts of you influence your poetry and influence your life in general as a teacher and how you navigate the world.
mean, it's definitely influenced the poetry. This book specifically is it has a framework of these letters that my aunt wrote to her mother as she was running away. And the reason why, and this is my white aunt and my white grandmother, one of the reasons why she was running away, this was during the 60s. So she was part of the anti-war movement. She was part of a lot of protests and stuff. And this is down in Long Beach. And my grandparents were Southern and super conservative. They had moved out here, just for, a better economic advantage. And so my aunt started dating a black dude. And my grandfather beat her up because of it. And so she ran away. And we haven't heard, these letters, we haven't heard from her since. So we're talking in the early 70s, we haven't heard from her. And so there's this weird absence and presence that she has throughout my life because after she ran away, my grandfather left. My grandma basically went kind of catatonic and suicidal for a couple of years. And my mom had to pick up the pieces for the family. And she was 15 at the time. And so the absence of this aunt, again, it becomes a huge presence in who we are and how we shape our identity. And it shaped our family. It definitely left a gap in masculine role models. So then my mom marries my dad, and she meets him at 18. They get married when she's 19. And then I have this interesting dichotomy where my mom doesn't necessarily know what it is to be married to a person of color. And she's also raising his two kids from a prior marriage, who are both full-blooded Filipino. And it's a lot of this balancing act of trying to, for them, it was just whatever we could do to get by. I mean, you're an immigrant with two kids. And then on the other side, you're putting a family back together that's been broken since you were in your teens. Economically, they were struggling. So it's a lot of poverty, a lot of racial identity that are constantly conflicting. And so my poetry comes from this place of there's no right answer in this. Yeah, my mom could have learned to be more racially culturally knowledgeable and responsive, but she's also just trying to survive. And then on the flip side of things, you have my dad who, I love my dad, but he admits that he begged, borrowed, and stole to get here. So he'd do whatever he could to make a living, to survive. So having those two forces at play constantly, you start to realize that there's no right answer, and whatever we choose is what we had to, or at the very least, it's the right way for that time. And so a lot of this book is trying to come to terms with that, trying to realize there's no judgment. There can be no judgment. So there's some bad things that are written about in here. There's some good things that are written about in here. And really, at the end of the day, they just exist. They just are. There's no judgment on it.
Yeah, I mean, the letters from the aunt are kind of an anchor to the book, a thread that follows throughout the book that I think is very powerful and very, very effective. Talk a little bit about your father. Now, you said that he, begged, stole, and borrowed. You went through a lot of stuff to get here. Talk a little bit about him. Was he, I guess he was, when he was here, he met you. I guess your mother was 18. So I'm assuming that he was probably a little bit older, but still He was probably a young guy. Was he from Cebu, or where exactly from the Philippines? How did he get here?
He's from Cebu. Actually, it's an Asian thing, right? We don't necessarily talk about our histories all that much. How he gets here he doesn't necessarily say who sponsored him. I believe it was his older brother that sponsored him to come here. I know that and I only learned this from Ancestry.com. I know that his citizenship was through marrying my mom.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. My dad, that guy's a character. I'm gonna reveal some dirt. I love him very much, but this dirt is. It doesn't work written on the page because it's kind of unbelievable and too complex. But so he comes over here. He's got his kids back in Cebu still. His sister is taking care of them, and he meets my mom. And he portrays himself as like this widower. He's all like, yeah, my wife died, and I'm just trying to do all this for my kids, my 2 kids. I'm sending money back home. I'm hoping to get them over here. And my mom totally falls in love with this story. And so she marries him. They have me. The kids come over here. They have another, I have another brother too. And the funny thing is my dad used to be a hardcore Catholic. He went to seminary before he got married and dropped out. And I add that because he doesn't believe in divorce. So
right, a lot of Filipinos don't. It's illegal, right?
Yeah.
Illegal back in the Philippines. Yeah.
So the way he got out of a divorce was he purchased a death certificate for his wife. So she is officially dead according to the Philippine government.
Oh man.
And, my dad wrote that story that she was dead with my mom for, I think I was like 10 or 11. And his ex-wife tracks him down and was like, hey, what's this that I'm dead? So my dad, a very interesting guy, is very much like, how do I game the system? How do I figure out a way to make it work?
Yeah. I mean, part of what's interesting here is the issue of being mixed race, and that some of it can be seen as ambiguity, racially ambiguous, Filipino and white. With that mix, some folks look more white, and you wouldn't be able to tell the Filipino side of them. And this causes conflict because the brown part of them is still the brown part of them. I remember when the Andrew Cunanan thing came down, and when I heard the name Cunanan, I knew he was Filipino. I knew. But when you looked at him, he didn't look it. And his name was constantly mispronounced, Cunanan. And then when they made descriptions of him, when they described him, 6'2", 220, I thought he's part white, because number one, Filipinos, we don't grow that big. We just don't. Could you talk about that? I think there was a poem in the book about, or actually not even in the book. I think it was a poem called Mixed Raced Luck, about neither side really accepting who you are or who you're coming to be in your own consciousness. What's the burden of that, being a mixed race person in terms of privilege, as opposed to your other siblings, for instance, right? How does that kind of play out and, in your everyday life?
When you said that description of like a 6 foot tall Filipino, I have a cousin who's full blood, or 2 cousins actually, are full blooded Filipino. One of them is 6'5".
Oh man,
big dude. I'm tall and thick. This dude is tall and thick. He got a full ride for playing football. But for me specifically, my immediate family, it's really weird because my older brothers, they're full Filipino, but they present more like Asian. Like you can tell there's some Chinese blood from back in the day. A little bit lighter skinned. Yeah. And then my younger brother, who's my full brother, he presents white. Like long hair, like light brown hair, really light skin. So being in between becomes like a very odd place, because I have older brothers who don't necessarily, growing up, it was really hard to stake an identity towards being Filipino. And my mom and my dad tried really hard to say that we were all brothers. It's not about half. It's just we are who we are. My mom, like to this day, will say, I raised y'all as brothers. Your older brothers are my kids. It's not an argument. It's a non-starter. So like staking claim to being Filipino becomes weird for a couple of young boys who have no language, because when they came over, my eldest brother was supposed to be in third grade. He was 8. My older brother was 6. And there was no ESL program at the school that my dad wanted to bring them to. So the school said, we can take them, but they both have to be put into kindergarten. An 8-year-old in kindergarten is a little problematic.
Yeah.
So my dad said, all right, we can't have that. So we will only speak English in this household from now on. If you need something, it has to be, if you're hungry, you're going to starve unless you could ask for it in English. So my older brothers just lost that language right away. They lost a lot of, just cultural touchstones that don't exist anymore. So growing up, anytime I would try to stake my identity towards being Filipino, they would say, no, you're not, you're white. And then I'd go out into the world and everybody's saying I'm a little too dark with this last name. And in Southern California, at best, I'm Latino, I'm definitely not white. And then I'd have a little brother who doesn't share the same experience at all with me because he's white passing. So he is treated differently from my dad. And he also had some, learning disabilities and stuff like that too. So just layers of intersectional identities, making things very complex and very hard to navigate. So like I said, the book becomes a lot of just these multiple things that I'm trying to hold in tension with each other, mainly because that's what my life had to be. Is I'm not full Filipino and not accepted by that community that's closest to me. And I'm definitely not white. That grandfather who beat up his daughter, he's still alive. I have never spoken with him. I've been in the same room with him and he hasn't acknowledged my existence.
There's this separation geographically between the people up on the hill and where you're at. Can you address that in terms of, what that's like and how that affects you emotionally, and how you push through as a poet, as an artist, to try to reconcile and try to make sense of it?
Yeah. So the interesting thing is, it could be a question of my background, like living in poverty, or just trying to find an identity the long way around, like through books rather than through people. But I enjoy like losing causes and I enjoy symbolism. So where I live, San Pedro, is on a peninsula. So it's the closest thing to an island you could get without being an island. And this area is so conflicting in its characteristics. On one side, you have LA, the Port of LA, which is has the most business coming through it than any other port in the world, I believe. Definitely, last I read, it was like $3 billion worth of merchandise come through here a day.
Wow.
Yeah. But right next to that port, like on the water, it's a working waterfront, you have projects. Like serious poverty. We call them the lows. It's everything that's below the street, below Pacific is called the lows. And a lot of it is impoverished. And weirdly, as you go uphill away from the water, things start getting more economically advantageous to the point where once you reach the top of the hill, you're in Palos Verdes, which is no longer San Pedro. Like there's a hard line between San Pedro and RPV, so Rancho Palos Verdes, all Palos Verdes estates, all that other stuff. And so we are the closest to money, but also the furthest away from it. And the people up on the hill who, I mean, I know some people that live up on the hill who don't commute by car because they don't want to deal with it. They will fly a helicopter to work down the hill.
Yeah.
You know, and the air itself, since if we have a west, an eastern blowing wind from the ocean, the air is blocked because the hill is on the west side of us. So, everything's like about 10 degrees cooler up there than it is down here. And where I used to live, one of the reasons why I picked San Pedro, the only house we could afford, was in Bandini Canyon. John Fonte,
yeah.
Named his character after Bandini, which was like a manure, like a fertilizer company. But I lived in Bandini Canyon, and it got like 20 degrees hotter than whatever was happening up on the hill. So just living down there, I was just always so mad because everything was always so hot and the air was stagnant. And, you drive up just a little ways and everything's fine. And Bandini, the canyon, but there's also a Bandini street over here, is the color line where you brought up those covenants saying that you couldn't. Bandini was the red line where houses below Bandini were allowed to be sold to people of color. Houses above Bandini had those covenants. My house, the one I live in right now, is above Bandini, and it has that covenant. It says that it's not allowed to, you're not allowed to sell it to, quote, blacks or Orientals. So yeah, like this place is amazing because of its internal conflicts. We don't want to be part of LA, but we're part of LA. LA keeps a hold of us because of the port. So we are actually LA City proper. If you put San Pedro on your address, though, your mail will get shipped to other places in LA that have the same street addresses. And computers will just start auto-correcting and go with LA instead of San Pedro, even though the zip code should send it to your house. It's a regular thing where I have to track down a package that went up to downtown LA.
You know, what's funny is the irony in this, because you have Bandini, who is a character in a John Fonte novel, who was all about telling the stories. He was a poor Italian, but there were Mexicans, there were people of color in his books. And then with the mail snafu, you have Mr. Bukowski, who, San Pedro, worked for the post office, hated it. I think Bukowski said that, a lot of humanity's problems could be solved if you could find a way to get rid of the mailbox. But, speaking of Bukowski, there was a book that he did called Septuagenarian Stew, a collection of poems and short stories. Not his best book, but it was the one that really, after I read that, I kind of found my voice. It was almost like I got permission. I just got permission to kind of say what it was I needed to say. After reading that, I thought, wow, this guy's saying things that I'm feeling, right? So I just went for it. And he was a great influence. I'd listened to some of his CDs, and, he says San Pedro. So I knew if he's saying it, then that's the right way to say it. We're going to have to wrap up. It's been fantastic talking to you about this new book. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with? Information on how to get your book, or look at your work online, or whatever.
Obviously hit me up on Instagram at Poet Loz. The book comes out, Mood Tight Press, later this year. I'm told it's supposed to be September, October. I'm going to be late with stuff. Like, that's just how that works. So later this year, just in time for Christmas presents. But yeah, it should be on my Instagram. I also have a website that definitely looks like it's not done because it's not called readuntillmorning.org. I had a bookstore for a little bit that was under that name. So me and my co-writer for my first book, we still use that. But yeah, and then I'm actually working on a book about Bukowski and Bukowski San Pedro. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that.
That's fantastic. Again, he's a color till he's not. It has a character in here who describes, I guess, the internal negotiations and concessions. It's Monster, is that correct? And yeah. I guess Monster would be your own internal. You come across as anything but a monster, but as with monsters, there's passion, there's fire, there's the drive, and I feel that it was written with love, even though, there's some very tough territory, tough waters that you had to navigate. All in all, it was really, when you come down, it really told with love,
Thank you for seeing that, man. When the invasive becomes domestic. So starved of poem on my tongue, I'm reading a poem about the death of Filipina domestic workers who will be buried in foreign soil. And I perk up at the words Cebu and Cebuano and say other Filipino phrases out loud, hoping my mouth finds them familiar one day. I knew the anxiety of metal-to-metal tapping on room number plates with housekeeping keys before entering the unknown. First, I knew to use a towel to prop the door open for plausible deniability if something goes missing or so passersby can hear me call. Second, I knew no matter the situation, say sorry if the occupant is in the room. Third, I knew to go about my business, pretend the occupant isn't there, but listen for their words, listen for their movements. Fourth, coil exhausted muscles just in case, but I never reminded myself I am a man, and I never thought about these brown aunties and what it meant for them to go tapping on occupied doors and the messes they were expected to clean. I never knew to listen for an auntie's call and wouldn't know the Cebuano word for help if I heard it.
I'm Martha Senator.
And I'm Tony Robles.
We're readers and writers.
And co-hosts of Listen and Be Heard.
We talk with authors about their new books.
From the Carolinas, around the country, and beyond.
We read their books and bring their voices and insights to Asheville.
So join us in the act of creating community culture.
On Listen and Be Heard Radio, every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m.
WPVM 103.7 FM and online at WPVMFM.org.
I am a woman. Female Spanish guitar curved intricately, complex notes resounding from a soul composed of music. I am a woman, soft as diamonds, no pale, anemic, untried virgin, full bloom, fragrant, intoxicating female of an ancient order of risen souls. I am raw creation, groaning life into existence. I arch my back, throw back my head, and the universe contracts in synchronous time lapses, pregnant with my expectations. My open hand tickles the belly of the horizon as I inhale my dreams risen from the altars of my efforts, some dashing crystalline, forlorn on the shores of my regrets. I am kin to the beginning of beginnings, begetting infinity, life, Nile, pulsing in the veins of the universe, enigma, shrouded in the elemental simplicity of a sunrise. In the middle of the night, baby, I am a woman.
The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The things that I'm thinking could put me in prison. The fruit, someone owns the soil, someone owns the water, and someone owns the oil, someone owns the sky, someone owns the trees, someone owns Manhattan, but they can't own me. Everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Ooh, everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Government is dead, corporations rule, politicians hoping that everyone's a fool. Wanna live in wage, don't wanna be a slave. Anything I gotta do to break that cage. Oh, everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Ooh, everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Someone owns the soil, someone owns the water, and someone owns the oil. Someone owns the sky, someone owns the trees, someone owns Manhattan, but they can't own me. Oh, everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Ooh, everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now. Everyone's a criminal unless you got the money, honey. Everyone's a criminal now.
Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 99, wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience. I will dispense this advice now. Enjoy the power and beauty of your youth. Oh, never mind. You will not understand the power and beauty of your youth until they've faded. But trust me, in 20 years, you look back at photos of yourself and recall in a way you can't grasp now how much possibility lay before you and how fabulous you really looked. You are not as fat as you imagine. Don't worry about the future, or worry, but know that worrying is as effective as trying to solve an algebra equation by chewing bubblegum. The real troubles in your life are apt to be things that never crossed your worried mind, the kind that blindsides you at 4 p.m. on some idle Tuesday. Do one thing every day that scares you. Sing. Don't be reckless with other people's hearts. Don't put up with people who are reckless with yours. Floss. Don't waste your time on jealousy. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. The race is long. And in the end, it's only with yourself. Remember compliments you receive. Forget the insults. If you succeed in doing this, tell me how. Keep your old love letters. Throw away your old bank statements. Stretch. Don't feel guilty if you don't know what you want to do with your life. The most interesting people I know didn't know at 22 what they wanted to do with their lives. Some of the most interesting 40-year-olds I know still don't. Get plenty of calcium. Be kind to your knees. You'll miss them when they're gone. Maybe you'll marry, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll have children, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll divorce at 40. Maybe you'll dance the funky chicken on your 75th wedding anniversary. Whatever you do, don't congratulate yourself too much, or berate yourself either. Your choices are half chance. So are everybody else's. Enjoy your body. Use it every way you can. Don't be afraid of it or what other people think of it. It's the greatest instrument you'll ever own. Dance. Even if you have nowhere to do it but in your own living room. Read the directions, even if you don't follow them. Do not read beauty magazines. They will only make you feel ugly. Get to know your parents. You never know when they'll be gone for good. Be nice to your siblings. They're your best link to your past and the people most likely to stick with you in the future. Understand that friends come and go, but with a precious few, you should hold on. Work hard to bridge the gaps in geography and lifestyle, because the older you get, the more you need the people you knew when you were young. Live in New York City once, but leave before it makes you hard. Live in Northern California once, but leave before it makes you soft. Travel. Accept certain inalienable truths. Prices will rise, politicians will philander, you too will get old. And when you do, you'll fantasize that when you were young, prices were reasonable, politicians were noble, and children respected their elders. Respect your elders. Don't expect anyone else to support you. Maybe you have a trust fund, maybe you'll have a wealthy spouse, but you never know when either one might run out. Don't mess too much with your hair, or by the time you're 40, it will look 85. Be careful whose advice you buy, but be patient with those who supply it. Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth. But trust me on the sunscreen.
change and all the fullness a new day brings. Fresh songs explode on lovers' lips, the sun on the mountain's hips. This music moves to fill new spaces, pulsating places, as human spirits soar, as flowers roar, above the mental dung and carcass of a stale song sung. We leave behind and climb the spirit free, transforming reality with passion and compassion to kill a lie that's ailing. These quiet saints are wailing. Oh, love must die. A love supreme, the baby cries, as bullets are put to rest. We go to bed with raindrops and poets in our chest, and loins heavy with flaming suns and dew, and colors in our dreams that no one else has seen. Shade of a love that was made of flowers in a rainbow's nest. Fruit from the wise one's lips, sun on the mountain's hips, flutes in the quiet, saxophones by it, all at the fingertips. Purple blossom blown through a bamboo kiss, sailing on a rainbow river drum, skin dipped in sunlight, watermelon in one arm, calabash full of dew in the other, large curves where she sat reading leaves and cowrie shells, talking to ancestors and singing ancient songs, her eyes onyx, infinitely balanced on a smile. She stuck her toes in my food, and I was healed. We made ablution in our tears and dried them in dreams woven tight like kente cloth. I am the mad one, but there's one that loves me. She picks cotton from my beard. She knows my muscles and has listened to the music of my dreams. Her eyes are deep. I can follow them and find my children. I like her bare feet and hands. She is open to me and warm. She is carving a smile on my face, and I cannot stop her. No one, except my children, can come that close to my beard.
The next is Maggie Estep.
Look, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I am the sex goddess of the Western Hemisphere. So don't mess with me. I got a big bag full of sex toys, and you can't have any because they're all mine because I'm the sex goddess of the Western Hemisphere. Hey, you may say to yourself, who the hell is she trying to kid? She's no sex goddess. But trust me, I am. If only for the fact that I have the unabashed gall to stand up here and call myself a sex goddess. I mean, after all, it's what so many of us have at some point thought. We've all had someone who worshipped our filthy socks and barked like a dog when we were near, giving us cause to pause and think, hey, you know, I may not look like much, but deep inside, I'm a sex goddess. Only we'd never come out and admit it publicly. Well, you wouldn't, but I will, because I am the sex goddess of the Western Hemisphere. I haven't always been a sex goddess. I used to be just a mere mortal woman, but I grew tired of sexuality being repressed and manifest in late-night 900 number ads where 3 bodacious bimbettes heave cleavage into the cameras, winking lens and sigh. Big girls, ooh. Bad girls, ooh. Blonde girls, ooh. Yeah, I got fed up with the ooh, ooh, ooh. I got fed up with it all, and I put on my combat boots and hit the road with my bag full of sex toys that were a vital part of my sex goddess image, even though I'd never actually use my sex toys, because my being a sex goddess, it isn't a sexual thing, it's a political thing. I don't actually have sex. I'm too busy taking care of important sex goddess business. Yeah. I gotta go on talk shows and MTV. I gotta become a parody of myself and make buckets full of money off my own inane brand of self-righteous pop psychology, because my pain is different. Because I am a sex goddess, and when I talk, people listen. Why? Because you guessed it. I am the sex goddess of the Western Hemisphere, and you're not.
Egyptians postulated 7 souls. Top soul, and the first to leave at the moment of death, is Ren, the secret name. This corresponds to my director. He directs the film of your life from conception to death. The secret name is the title of your film. When you die, that's where Ren came in. Second soul and second one off the sinking ship is Second. Energy, power, light. The director gives the orders. Second presses the right button. Number 3 is Cool, the guardian angel. He, she, or it is third man out. Depicted as flying away across a full moon, a bird with luminous wings and a head of light. Sort of thing you might see on a screen in an Indian restaurant in Panama. responsible for the subject and can be injured in his defense, but not permanently, since the first 3 souls are eternal. They go back to heaven for another vessel. 4 remaining souls must take their chances with the subject in the land of the dead. Number 4 is Ba, the heart, often treacherous. This is a hawk's body with your face on it, shrunk down to the size of a fist. Many a hero has been brought down like Samson by a perfidious Ba. Number 5 is Ka, the double, most closely associated with the subject. The Ka, which usually reaches adolescence, the time of bodily death, is the only reliable guide through the land of the dead, the Western lands. Number 6 is Kahabit, the shadow, memory, your whole past conditioning from this and other lives. Number 7 is Seku, the remains.
That was the voice of William Burroughs, and it was produced by Bill Laswell, a cut called The Seven Souls. The CD is material with William S. Burroughs, The Road to the Western Lands. Before that, we heard Maggie S. Stepp, Sex Goddess of the Western Hemisphere, on a CD called Grand Slam, Best of the National Poetry Slam, Volume 1. And before that, we heard Kamal Daoud, a CD called Lemert Park, and that was a cut called Her for My Wife, Badia. And then, you know, it's graduation season. My youngest son just graduated from high school. My friends' children are graduating all in the last week or so, and some maybe still. This was a graduation speech for the class of 99. Baz Luhrmann presents Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. And before that, we heard Homer Erotic, and that was a cut called Criminal off a CD called Yield by Homer Erotic. The lead vocalist in there is Barbara Barg, and that was an all-female group, Homer Erotic. And then we also heard from a CD that Word Slanger handed me back in the day in the Bay Area when I was doing Listen and Be Heard Poetry Cafe. And she is a poet and playwright who is based in the Bay Area. And at the very beginning of that whole spoken word set, we heard Christian Lozada, who was also interviewed by Tony Robles. And we thank him for that interview. And I thank you also for listening today. This show is called Listen and Be Heard. And my name is Martha Senator. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about Listen and Be Heard and what it's about. Our tagline, if you go to our website, listenandbeheard.net, our tagline is creating community culture. And I've been thinking about that and kind of thinking of it in terms of gardening and even like my new concept of gardening. So I think, the important thing to remember here on WPVM is that this is community radio. It's not corporate sponsored, and neither is Listen and Be Heard. And I think a lot of times when we get corporate sponsorship for things, it's an influx of money, and their motivation oftentimes is not so much about why you're doing this as it is sort of a marketing thing for corporations and or an image thing. And all of that is fine. I'm not criticizing anybody for taking funds and grants, but I do believe that community exists without commerce. And that's what I'm looking at. That, like in my garden, I've taken the new approach that I'm not going out to buy fertilizers or any kind of expensive inputs. I'm using what I have. So, like, instead of going to buy, mulch, I'm growing my mulch. I'm not mowing as much. Fertilizer the same way. I'm using my animals to create fertilizer. And my point is that community is the same way. We already have everything. We already are a community, and we all have our skills and things that we need to bring to the table. And Listen and Be Heard is kind of like the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. We're just creating the communication between all the different elements of the community, and that is the culture. And I believe that we have what we need to do things like have festivals and retreats and get-togethers, and an actual network exists for people to come out and listen and be heard. And so that's just a little bit of philosophy about what we're doing. I encourage you to please come to listenandbeheard.net. We have full-length, unedited videos of the interviews that we do. Next week, Tony Robles will be speaking with Darren Todd, whose fiction has appeared in more than 40 publications over the years, including Hellbound Books, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and the Stone Slide Corrective. He's had 4 plays and a feature-length film produced, and even a nonfiction book on copyright law. Please join us next week for that. And I want to thank Jay Rodriguez for all the original music that he contributes to this show. And, of course, Tony Robles. My name is Martha Senator. This is WPVM 103.7 in Asheville. And we will be back next Wednesday from 3 to 5 for another edition of Listen and Be Heard.
And desperation. And moving on, 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 and moving on. Living it is giving it. Giving it is having it, taking it, moving it, shaking it, creating it, and loving it. Living it is being responsible for your own groove. It's playing on street corners for nickels and centimes and being asked to move. It's sleeping in roofless squats in ancient convents, running up against police, getting thrown into the streets where you belong. 'Cause living it is subletting. Living it is knowing your feet belong on the ground. It's knowing life is a dream.